carbohydrates, fat, energy balance, metabolism. So next week, week 5, we're going to get into the macronutrients and some of the methodology that we use for extreme athletes, physique athletes, or transformation clients. So a little bit more in depth and maybe even more aggressive. We'll find out next week in terms of working with this client population. But before we get into all of those details with the numerical values, let's talk just a little bit about the physiology process and strategies that we use. So we can start off just by the philosophical angles that we all take. For example, I'm not going to give somebody a ketogenic diet per se. I don't have a one-trick pony strategy where I say this is how everybody should diet. I conceptualize that every single type of diet may have some principles that are useful for some people some of the time. So I want my understanding and knowledge to be as diverse as there are methods out there. I can sift through what I think is a good starting point for most people, specifically based on what I think is sustainable. What I think with this client population, speaking of physique sport, what's going to get us the performance we want, which is of course getting them to that point of contest leanness we need. But what's going to be helpful in sustaining lean body mass, and in particular, how are we going to make sure that we're not unnecessarily suppressing the metabolism? So there are a lot of things that go through my mind in creating that initial macronutrient profile. But without getting into those numbers, what's the process you guys go through in terms of, okay, I'm now going to be setting up a structural design for this client, and here's how I make those decisions. What's your first step out?
Well, after interviewing them, I look at where their life is currently, if they are mentally prepared, if it's for a contest prep. That is the biggest thing for me. And what we talked about this before, if they're not ready, I don't push it. But if they're ready, in terms of now building the macronutrients.
Yeah, not specifically, the values, but as a dieting concept, what's the kind of programming that you generally create for people?
Okay, sorry. So I'm more of I like carbs. I like using carbs and having as much as possible within their body type to be able to make the progress we need to get the conditioning we need for the stage.
And why would that be? Why are you a fan of carb versus
metabolically boosting? It's better overall in terms of psychology, and it's better for you physiologically. It's metabolically boosting. I just said that. And you just feel better. Also, you can stay fuller. It's more anabolic. In combination of protein too. I don't like drastically cut it because you'll run into metabolic issues, like you said before. Depending on if you're at like 16 weeks out, you don't want to drastically cut the carbs because they'll be running into problems right away. Now, as you're dieting down, you might have to go low towards the end, but I try and minimize that as much as possible. I don't like to mentally break them down right away. I let them know ahead of time that they're going to break down a little bit mentally, but it's just the expectations of what's to happen.
So maybe answer the same thing, and then do kind of roundtable too on different strategies like time-restricted eating and intermittent fasting and things like that. So just in terms of carbs, fat, protein, what's kind of your general philosophy?
Yeah, so I definitely am a believer, especially for physique athletes, in carbohydrates, the benefits of performance in the gym, recovery in the gym. You just look better, which can be great from the psychology of an athlete. Looking flat can be terrible. So, I definitely like using higher carb refeeds even as we approach this. But, I'm definitely going to keep protein as the first thing that I take a notice of, is make sure we're, around a gram per pound of body weight for someone that's in good shape. For some obese clients, lean body mass might be a better indicator. And I might even ask them, do you like protein? Because I find that, protein is one macronutrient where if you're going to eat a little bit more of it, you might get a little bit more satiety. I definitely think there's such a thing as too much protein, as someone that tried eating 400 grams a day. But, when you're talking about, going over 1.2, 1.3 grams per pound, a 40-gram number. 15% to 20% is about as low as I'll go for their intake. And then I like to use carbohydrates and help them time them around their training, or if they're doing something like training very early in the morning, maybe I'll say, a late night high carb feed might fuel that workout in the morning. And then as prep goes on, I find that protein stays pretty stable. Fats might come down a little bit, but carbohydrates are going to tend to have, in the fat loss phase, the greatest variance from beginning to end.
And guys, especially in this little packet of information this week, it's really important to go through the Tier 1 workbook, where we actually go through a lot of the information on how to create macronutrient profiles and the correct energy balance for clients. But I'm gonna agree with these guys in that we're not just pro carb as if there's like one camp and we're always at war with the other. But carbohydrates are important for many reasons. We're proponents of managing. There has to be reduction calories, which includes carbohydrates. But if you completely eliminate carbs, you're going to really run into, as both Tyler and Paul said, reduction unnecessarily in metabolism and metabolic capacity, but also potentially lean body mass, certainly performance in the gym, which underlies all of those complications if you're not using some carbohydrate. Like Paul said, I think 15 to 20% of fats is definitely as low as you could possibly go and still be very practical. That's also in the chapter in Tier 1 over that entire topic. But let's move on into now, as you give people advice. So we talked last week about giving them their programming, and now we're talking about how we actually constructed that. So we might be explaining to them, here's why I'm giving you this information. Do you give them advice in how many meals a day, or do you leave that entirely up to them?
I like to leave it up to them initially. I give them a small suggestion. If you're already doing 3, let's maybe try 4. I don't try and make them do 6 or 8 or anything like that, because it's just not reasonable. But I try and leave it free game for them so that they're learning to be able to create meals that are to their lifestyle and make it more adherable.
What about any time-restricted intermittent fasting type windows that you operate in?
I don't initially. I only use it in, I call it like emergency situations. If they just have a really long day and they don't like to eat in the morning, they just don't feel very good when they eat in the morning. Or if they're really low in calories, sometimes I'll use that as a it's not a trick, but it's just kind of a mental barrier where they feel like they can eat more later on in the day, and so they feel more satiated. So sometimes I'll use strategies like that every once in a while. Maybe I'll use maybe 5 days in a row of that, and then 7 at normal meals, because then eventually sometimes they like to just hoard food.
Right.
And I don't like to get in that trap, but I still like to keep it, a middle ground of both. I don't like to do it right away.
Yeah, so I come from the school of getting enough protein in your meals to break that glucose threshold. So I typically, depending on someone's calorie intake, if you have an person that's eating an extreme amount of calories, it might require 6 meals a day to get all the calories in. But I find that 3 to 5 window is basically where most people are going to fit, breaking up their protein pretty evenly over those 3 to 5 meals to hit their 150, 200, whatever grams of protein it is per day for them. I do like prioritizing carbohydrates around training, especially the lower we get in calories. The leaner an individual gets, I find that meal timing becomes exponentially more important. Whereas someone who has a little bit extra body fat, if you go an extra hour without a meal, you might be fine. But, especially as myself as a competitor, this is something that I notice about myself, that meal timing becomes much more important. Not only